Welcome to Global Connections with Robert Siegel, Navigating the New Normal, presented by the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. Our monthly Leaders Forum addresses vital issues facing society and the economy, real estate and technology, medicine and science. My name is Dr. Joshua Plout. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, AFRMC, a 501c3 National American charitable organization based in New York City. We at AFRMC represent Israel's premier hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petah Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv, the leading institution named in honor of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The hospital is a model of coexistence. It serves 1 million patients annually from all ethnic and religious backgrounds with the same compassionate care. And now, during this time of war, the hospital is a front line of Israel's defenses, treats the many wounded Israeli soldiers and civilian casualties. We remain in awe of the doctors and nurses at Israel's Rabin Medical Center in the ER, ICU, and orthopedic departments as they respond to the October 7th atrocities. Medical staffing and vital equipment are dangerously low, and the hospital is working overtime to treat wartime patients. This is a national emergency for the hospital in Israel. So please donate and support our emergency rehabilitation campaign for wounded Israeli soldiers and civilians via our website at afrmc.org. Thank you very much. Our host and moderator for Global Connections is Robert Siegel, former host of All Things Considered on National Public Radio for 31 years. Over the course of an hour each month, Global Connections features guests who Robert Siegel interviews as they explore important issues in our world. And now, on to today's program. Today's Global Connections topic is universities and the federal government. Thank you to our very special guests, Arjun Appadurai, Professor Emeritus of Media, Culture, and Communication at New York University, Michael Roth, President of Wesleyan University, and Stephen Trachtenberg, President Emeritus and University Professor Emeritus of the George Washington University. And now, Global Connections with Robert Siegel.
Thank you, Josh. America's elite universities are under attack from Republicans in Congress and from the Trump administration. And it's not just a battle of words. Earlier this year, the administration threatened to cut off $400 million in federal contracts with Columbia University. And Columbia responded with a memo that acceded to many of Washington's demands. That included placing academic programs focused on the Middle East under special review by the university's administration. Well, far from being mollified, Washington responded with similar threats to Harvard, an end to over $2 billion in federal grants. Harvard responded indignantly and took the federal government to court. Washington responded by cutting almost another $500 million in grants. Many universities are now under federal review with a threat of funding cuts hanging over them. The stated reasons for all of these include diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, so-called DEI, the progressive politics of Ivy League and other elite campuses, but above all, it's said to be about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitic incidents have generally been on the rise in recent years, and the war in Gaza has certainly intensified support on campus and elsewhere for Palestinians. Those protests have featured criticism of Israel's existence and some incidents of either overt anti-Semitic language or language that has made pro-Israeli Jewish students feel abused. Well, it has turned into a painfully fractious conflict that has brought into question freedom of speech in academic settings, immigrants' protections under the First Amendment, the relationship between government and university, the excellence of American universities and the future of federally funded research, and perhaps the position of American Jews in American academic life. Big stuff, And we have a panel of exceptionally experienced and interesting people who have made their lives in the American university. And our first panelist, Michael S. Roth, has stood out as one of the most vocal critics among university presidents of the Republican attack on higher education. He is president of Wesleyan University in Connecticut. He's a graduate of that college who went on to earn a PhD at Princeton. President Roth, welcome to our panel.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
In your April 5th op-ed in the New York Times, you took on the present, I would say, double-barreled crisis. It's about federal intrusion into higher education, and it's about anti-Semitism on campus, which is the rationale that those doing the intruding cite so often. You wrote, "It isn't a legitimate effort to fight anti-Semitism. It's a cover for a wide range of agendas that have nothing to do with the welfare of the Jewish people." What do you say to people who say, look, Harvard and Columbia both issued reports which acknowledged there were instances of anti-Semitism in their campuses. There must be something behind the complaint.
Yeah, well, there is anti-Semitism at Harvard and at Columbia and even here at dear old Wesleyan, as there is anywhere in America. And that's not really what's behind these attacks on universities. Behind the attacks on the universities is an effort to ideologically control higher education. And the Project 2025 made that clear. Chris Rufo has made that clear. And even in the most recent communications from the Department of Education to Harvard, insisting that Harvard has to change its ways, they don't make any mention of anti-Semitism. They seem to have forgot about the Jews, just as President Trump seems to have forgot about Israel on his recent trip to the Middle East. The use of anti-Semitism is a ploy to insist on bringing universities to heel, that is, to make sure that they follow the ideological dictates or even whims of the president. And we Jews should not be fooled. It is tempting at a time when there are genuine anti-Semites out there, and there are plenty of critics of Israel out there. It's tempting for Jews to align with the president who at times expresses support for Israel. But as I say in that op-ed, he's also at other times expressed no reservations about having dinner with Nazis or aligning with Christian nationalists. So what should protect Jews, as it has in most of our history, is to align ourselves with the rule of law, with the basic civil rights, and the treatment of minorities in a fair way. To align ourselves with Christian nationalism would be a tremendous mistake.
When you say that the objective of all this is to gain control of higher education, or why? What is the prize of a president who enjoys greater control over colleges and universities?
Well, the president and his allies have made clear that they think that American elites have indoctrinated a generation of young people to have unpatriotic feelings, to be in favor of a kind of global approach to human rights that does not privilege America first, and that the core tactic of the right in its resurgence has been to take over cultural institutions, and the politics will follow. And so taking over higher education is important. Taking over cultural institutions like the Kennedy Center in Washington, or more importantly, mass media, bringing law firms to heel. These are all efforts to take independent elements in civil society, which in America have enjoyed their autonomy from federal control, and to bring them under federal control. This is the classic playbook of authoritarianism, of fascism, to make sure that you have alignment of institutions in civil society with the guys in charge. And in America, we've always resisted that. We've always been proud of a kind of local, you're not the boss of me attitude. You know, this is a free country. You should be able to do what you want. And universities have enjoyed that. They have been homes for critics of the federal government. but they're also homes for the most advanced cancer research or the development of AI or the development of new systems for the Defense Department. And so by undermining the autonomy of higher education, I do fear that this administration is undermining one of the great sources of strength for this country.
Is there any kernel of truth to the perception of the right that elite universities have spread the kind of insufficiently patriotic worldview, a more globalist view? Is there any hint of truth to that complaint?
Of course, because they're independent entities, and so you have lots of people at these schools who are quite critical of the federal government. But you have more people who actually want to go to Wall Street and make lots of money and not pay their taxes, which is the MO of the current administration. I mean, in the last 10, 15 years have been the heyday of the increased vocationalism at colleges and universities. It's not increased wokeism. Shouldn't be the headline. The headline are more and more people who want to go into conventional ways of contributing to the American economy. I myself, as a historian, lament this, actually. I'd rather see more people going into the cultural sphere. Right. But there is certainly a grain of truth that criticism of the government finds a home in universities. But that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. That shows that universities are places for independent thinking and that you can have pushback against American institutions. There is a more important aspect of truth in the complaint that American universities have not been as hospitable to conservative thinkers, to religious students and faculty, to libertarian students and faculty. And I do think we in universities, and I've been arguing this for the last decade, have to do a much better job of being a more interesting and hospitable place for conservative and religious students and faculty members.
Give us a sense. You're a university president. How important is federal funding to Wesleyan University?
So on a $300 million budget, about $20 million annually goes through the federal government in one way or another. Some of those
you don't have a medical
grants,
school.
Some of that is financial aid for students. And then all of us at colleges and universities who have endowments of any kind benefit from tax advantages to those who make charitable contributions to colleges and universities. And so the recent effort to create an endowment tax on some colleges and universities is a threat because we use our endowment to support financial aid. So 40% of our students are on very significant financial aid without any loans, and our endowment makes that possible. So one of the things that the government is doing is attacking universities by attacking their finances. And that is a tax on endowments. And at large research universities, particularly those with hospitals attached to them, they can go after major scientific grants. And that's really a shame because the scientific research profile of American colleges and universities is the best in the world. No one doubts that. And one of the reasons it's so important is because if you're running a business, you need to turn a profit pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But if you're at a university, you can afford to do long-term research on cancer, on energy consumption, on the tools for the Defense Department in ways that don't have to have immediate payoff. And that's where the government invests in colleges and universities. They're not just subsidizing them for fun. They're actually investing in research that over time will pay great dividends for the country as a whole.
President Roth, stick with us because we're going to have the discussion period in a little while. But we're going to turn now to our second panelist, who wrote a very interesting article in April in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Professor Arjun Appadurai's essay is titled "The University is a Hostage, but There's Hope." Appadurai is Professor Emeritus of Media, Culture, and Communication at New York University. He now lives in Berlin, where he's also a visiting professor at Humboldt University. He came to the United States from Mumbai, India, as a foreign student at Brandeis, and he went on to earn a doctorate at the University of Chicago, working on the Committee on Social Thought. Professor Appadurai, welcome. It's been nice meeting you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You've written about how weak American universities were when they were exposed to be under pressure from Washington, and you would say that they've been weakened in one way, by a kind of academic mission creep, the expansion of institutional ambitions. I want you to explain that. What is the mission creep you have in mind?
Well, though I'm not a professional historian like President Roth and several of you, I believe that over the last century, give or take, the university has taken on a very large number of functions that go beyond the function of transmitting existing knowledge, creating new knowledge, and training young people to think well. That's the core pretty much. But now we have a very large range of functions that go from adjudicating American civil rights law on our campuses in some great detail, dealing with extremely complex fiscal issues that have to do with the endowment, with fees, with our financial aid systems, which are extremely complex. Thirdly, IT issues, which put us deep in the heart of Silicon Valley every day for our teaching technologies, our emails, so on and so forth. Then we have another range of functions, which I call pastoral. Mm-hmm. That is, taking care of the feelings of students, taking care of their clinical states, taking care of their anxieties, and sometimes doing the same for their parents who are footing the bill for college and have their own anxieties. Of course, we have a huge medical systems that serve a tremendous function, but that also were not part of the original design. If you go back to the history of universities in Europe and go back to Bologna or Göttingen or wherever, the idea of them being hospitals would strike everyone as extremely strange. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that these are examples, but I think you can multiply them. I've not even touched on athletics, yes, which is a separate business in the US, but now has become a portfolio of the university. So the core functions have been lost a bit to view, and these additional functions consume huge amounts of energy, money, attention.
One provocative word you use in describing what the contemporary university feels it must be is a kindergarten. What do you have in mind when you write that?
Well, yes, it's a strong word, and it's a word that says that while we think often that we are doing the best to be mindful of the needs of the young adults who come to our classes, actually we are often infantilizing them. We are reducing their capacity to handle controversy, their capacity to negotiate deep differences, their capacity to oppose people who are in power without turning to violence, the Gandhian lesson, the Martin Luther King lesson. All these are weakened when we treat young people as needing immense coddling and handholding. And while I don't think that's true all the time, and by every professor or every president, I think there is a secular trend towards making young people behave like they're even younger than they are.
You contrast the intellectual arguments, the purposeful disputatiousness that was part of your education at both Brandeis and University of Chicago. You think today's universities are unwilling to host that sort of argument for fear of violating what are understood to be terms of modern civility?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. I do think there's been a slippage in the wrong direction. In short, there's fewer and fewer protocols for dealing with real differences, let's say racial differences, class differences, neighborhood differences, national differences. Very few have good protocols for guiding them. So actually what we have is a lot of anger, a lot of difference of opinion, a lot of hostility. And the case of Palestine and Israel on campuses is an excellent display of very hot arguments, more or less removed from the dispassionate space of pedagogy, argument, and inquiry. That's a very, very dangerous chasm that's open between those two things.
a dispassionate space. I mean, the
Correct.
uh, some people would vote the most popular teacher on campus and say among his or her virtues are the passion that that person brings to the subject. You're looking for something else.
Well, yes, in the sense that I like to think in a kind of restatement of Barry Goldwater that I do believe in extremism, but in the defense of liberalism. That is to say, I believe in being aggressive to say there are always multiple points of view and we've got to bridge them. So that you could be passionate about. And I think some of our finest political theorists, philosophers on campuses are passionate, but they are passionate about the right thing, which is my ability and yours to be passionate, but to subordinate passion to principled argumentation, which has a root in taking the other to be at least as reasonable as oneself.
You wrote in the Chronicle of Higher Education that universities should be willing to risk unpopularity, which they're not. What would be an example of that?
Well, I think historical examples would be places like parts of the University of Chicago where I went, or St. John's University, places really doing things that border on being, let's say, monastic in their approach to books, ideas, arguments, and they are certainly not popular. But what I have in mind is today, because of the all fronts, all hands on deck attack that you have spoken about and Michael Roth has spoken about, others have spoken about, for that reason, what I think is required is a certain principled courage to go back to the basics. And the basics are very clear. Great ideas, clear arguments, principled inquiry, open debate. It's not a mysterious menu. But going back to that, when we've begun to do 85 other things, does require some courage from donors, from presidents, from boards, and indeed from students. But as I said in that article, if the USA, with the number of billionaires that it has, cannot muster enough support for a few such institutions, I don't know who on the planet could.
I'm unfairly, I'll ask you to give me the nutshell version of when you write the university is a hostage, but there's hope. I want you to describe the hope briefly.
Hope is that the American educational system at all levels is still the apple of the global eye. And those hundreds of thousands of researchers, scholars, students at every level who want to come to the US cannot all be wrong. Personally, I think they're right. The US educational system is still the greatest concentration of talent of two kinds. Talent that preserves the past and talent that's mastered how to create new knowledge. That is research. Mm-hmm. That is it. So that is the value on which all our hopes must rest. Now, whether one feels hopeful in the face of all these attacks, I keep reminding myself that Trump has a 4-year term unless he changes the constitution and everything else, and then we're all gone. But if not, we have to live through this like certain old religious sects. We may have to go underground for a while, keep ourselves alive, and then emerge in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, with our values intact and with our energies refocused, and this time aware that our most difficult achievements can be undone in a year, 2 years, 3. So we will be forewarned this time.
Well, Arjun, Appadurai, stick with us because we'll be talking all together in about 10 minutes. But we now round out our panel with our third member, Stephen Joel Trachtenberg. From 1988 until 2007, he was president of the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Before that, he was president of the University of Hartford, and before that, vice president of Boston University. Trachtenberg was educated at Columbia, Yale Law School, and then Harvard's Kennedy School. In addition to being president emeritus of GW, he is also the namesake of the university's Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. And indeed, at one time, he worked for the federal government. Steve Trachtenberg, welcome to our panel. I just want to hear very broadly, if Steve is with us, there you are, how the current pressure on universities from the federal government, how serious is this? How dangerous is it?
It's very serious, it's very dangerous, and it's very foolish. I fear that we have an administration that never heard about seduction. I believe that had the Trump administration endeavored to seduce America's higher education, they could have succeeded. And Trump could be in a very different relationship with its academic community. And I think it's imperative that that relationship be established as soon as possible, because the nation is driven to some extent by what is discovered on our campuses. The president is very proud of American industry. He wants America's businesses to thrive. And he does not seem to understand how imperative it is that they are sustained by the ingenuity and the inventions that come out of our universities. He also doesn't seem to understand that by cutting off funding of research scholars who are searching for the cures to cancer in one thing or another, he's injuring America and not making America great again, but making it worse. Even if you feel more belligerent, mm-hmm. and you want to say, well, we are a country that needs to be able to defend itself, the atomic bomb was discovered in great extent by researchers at Columbia and Chicago and elsewhere in the United States. And those, talking about Chicago University of Chicago, to diminish the capacity of our universities, it seems to me is a self-inflicted wound.
You're describing a relationship, the long-term relationship is one of great benefit to the federal government and the rest of the country, you would say, but the immediate relationship seems to be one of incredible dependence of the universities on the federal government.
Some universities and not others. Michael Roth is fortunate in being the president of a reasonably well-endowed college, and one which does not have a medical school or a school of engineering. By contrast, Columbia has a medical school, and much of the work that is done by their professors is funded by the federal government. We've developed a model which this is work done for pay. I mean, it's not as if they are being charitable to Columbia. They're going to Columbia because they believe that the professor at Columbia is the best person to investigate some aspect of the science that they're interested in. I myself was a lawyer for a couple of years with the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, and we contracted with American universities all over the country, from New York to California, to do research that was in the interests of the American people. The research that is being cut off is research that is being done on behalf of the American people. It seems a strange way to punish the universities for what they believe are infractions. Indeed, it seems to me like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Something that might happen at the medical school, I guess. You were president of George Washington University. Let's say you were president of another university that has a medical school and that has an engineering school and a lot of federal grants, and you received the kind of communication that Columbia or Harvard received, warning them of a cutoff unless they change their practices in some way. What would your reaction be?
Horror. I think the first thing I do is try to get a drink. Listen, it's a real problem. the universities have in fact made themselves hostage to their investors, and to the extent that they have all sorts of protocols, including tenure, they're going to suffer if they try to maintain the way they do business without having their principal client there to fund them. So the university, who is being threatened by Donald Trump, is got a serious advocate against them, and they have to deal with it seriously, and they have to make hard choices. Harvard has made one choice. We'll see how that works out. My first inclination would be to say, as Mr. Trump might, let's make a deal.
And I think Mr. Trump might say, I don't think you have very good cards, is what I think he might say.
He might indeed, and then you try to take your case to the American people. I think Mr. Trump is wrong, and as I said earlier, in trying not to seduce America's higher education. America's higher education is as patriotic and as committed to the country as any other institution. Now, I understand that there are Republicans and Democrats; they hold different points of view, but there is a middle, and Mr. Trump has got to be aware of the fact that he's not going to live forever. He's not going to serve forever. There will be a Democratic president who will follow him, and if that president were to pursue his goals in the manner that Mr. Trump is, there'd be a significant reversal. The truth of the matter is, there are plenty of things that are wrong with America's universities, and that changing and refreshing is a useful thing for all institutions, higher education as well as medicine, as well as commerce and all sorts of other activities that go on in the country. There's room for change, there's room for improvement, and I think even Harvard agrees that many of the things that they were asked to do, they could do. And Columbia agreed that some of the things they were asked to do, they could do. So the first thing you do is you try to accommodate by doing those things. But I don't think it's any of the business of the federal government to set the curriculum of the university or to, in fact, intrude itself excessively into the day-to-day operations of the institution. Now, anti-Semitism, racism, things of this sort, obviously it is the job of the government to see to it that all Americans are protected and feel safe on our campuses, as they are in all other activities in our society.
I was thinking about the kinds of research that might be affected by federal grants, and I imagined a social scientist, an anthropologist, sociologist who was expert in the culture of Venezuelan street gangs, and how that person might actually have answers for us to questions that would conflict with the administration's answers to those questions.
They might indeed, but that's all small potatoes. There's not big money in that.
So
the money is in the engineering school. The money is in the medical school. The money
and that's what I want to know. Steve. What's in it to? I understand the political motive of that small example, but what's the political motive of horning in on medical research and cutting back on contracts?
The problem, as I said before, is I think this administration shoots first and aims later. I think had they aimed differently, we might have had an outcome in which they said, well, we're going to cut back on grants to the humanities or the social sciences, but we're going to leave the medical school and the engineering school money alone. That would have injured the universities and clearly gotten their attention. Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't have crippled them. What I'm concerned with is not that they will be hurt in the short term, but they will be hurt in the long run. The institutions, which, as I say, I believe are imperative for the welfare of our nation, are being injured in a way that will take them a significant amount of time to recover, and no patriot ought to want that to happen.
Yeah. They're of some value, some importance to citizens of other countries too. Our universities educate a great many foreign students who aren't targeted especially by Washington, unless they took part in protests. But they are. We hope they're still as attracted to America as Professor Appadurai was back when he came to Brandeis some decades ago. What's our stake in having foreign students, international students, look upon the American university as the place to study?
Well, Mother Nature turns out to be an affirmative action participant. I mean, brains, talent, genius is found in all people all over the planet. And the United States has had the good fortune, I think, of having people come from all over the planet, many of whom got their degrees, their education, and their degrees here and stayed and contributed. If you look at the kinds of people who are populating and contributing in Silicon Valley, who are the professors in the United States today, they're not all born in Brooklyn or, for that matter, North Dakota. They are from countries in Asia and Europe and other parts of the world. And we have been the beneficiaries of genius from people who have come to get their educations here and then have stayed to participate in the next generation. It's a major mistake to make it harder and harder for people to come to our universities. We're missing out on talent. And once they start going to Australia, once they start going to England, once they start going to other places, it's very hard to bring them back.
Steve Trachtenberg, thanks. And I'd like to stay with us. I'm going to bring back Michael Roth and Arjun Appadurai. And first, I'd like to hear what the three of you have heard in the others' presentations. Michael Roth, any comments that you'd like to make on what you've heard?
I just, in terms of what Arjun talked about, the drift of American universities or the expansion of their portfolio of interests, it's not really that surprising that they would have expanded since the University of Bologna in the Middle Ages. And of course, in the United States, we have a tradition that goes back at least 100 and maybe 150 years of thinking about undergraduate education as an education of the whole person. And that's a recipe or an invitation to really expand what we think of as knowledge, what we think of as academics, into lots of other parts of one's life. And I think American undergraduate education is the richer for it. And the partnership of the federal government with universities making for an expansion, a dramatic expansion in the research capacity of universities, especially in biomedical fields and in the hard sciences. This has really enabled extraordinary advances in knowledge, as well as technological innovations that have contributed dramatically in the business world and in clinical medicine. So I think that expansion has been, it was organic for a long time and rather slow. And then in the wake of the Second World War, when it was clear that the cooperation with the universities would actually dramatically change the fortunes of the country in terms of its military strength and economic capacity, that of course the government invested in extraordinary ways in not falling behind the Soviet Union in the sciences, as you'll recall from the Sputnik era, and using the government's resources to get universities to expand knowledge in ways that enhance the strength of the nation. And what the Trump administration is doing is so extraordinarily counterproductive. It's based on an aversion to knowledge. It's based on an affection for stupidity and substituting ideology for research. And it will be tremendously harmful to the United States.
And Arjun, Appadurai, what have you heard?
I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, both my colleagues on the panel are very experienced and have excellent things to say, and we are largely in agreement, I think. about the nature of the crisis, where to put the weight. I'll just say one quick comment on Michael's observation about the outsourcing issue. Of course, it was a bit of a stretch to talk of Bologna, but if you talk of the US in the last 100 years and look at Stanford, for example, I say this in my article, but it deserves a book beyond my capacities. Stanford, in relation to Silicon Valley, has very little to do with the federal government, but it is a completely different form than Caltech, MIT, Hopkins, every other university I know, but it is a form to look at because it's a major university and it is hard to draw the line between it. It's not about dependence, independence. So anyway, there's a discussion, I think, to be had about that. It's also complemented the question of outsourcing or insourcing social functions beyond the capacities of the university, which is my view, but the outsourcing of the core ones. So in my article, I've said something which I've been thinking about for decades. Namely, when you look at Microsoft, you look at Google, you look at this, they do a lot of training and credentialing. So does the Army, so does the church, so does the Navy. In other words, I know this sounds extreme, but I do think in the area of basic university activities, there are about 10 major institutions that now regularly eat our lunch, but that's worth discussing anyway. So that's my concern. Core things go out, outside things come in. That's a very crude way to put it. But I do want to say one thing that occurred to me listening to both Stephen and to Michael, and that is the connection about the puzzle we all have. Why the attack on research? Why the attack that too on research that's so obviously beneficial? What does it have to do with the cart before the horse, namely the attack on the humanities, DEI, wokeness, cultural studies? All of a sudden, it was all the way to cancer research at engineering schools. Very odd for many of us to follow. I've been puzzling over this, and I have a proposal, just a speculation. And the speculation is that we have over-contrasted the liberal arts college at its best, like Wesleyan, with the high-powered research, heavy funding places that turn out new scientific knowledge. We've overstated the contrast. And the reason is this. It is in the liberal arts college that the basic forms of argumentation, of figuring out how you get from data to evidence, and so on, are actually installed. No one in grad schools or in postdocs teaches you those things. They assume you know those things. And then they go on to molecular biology or making drones, but they don't teach you those things. Those things happen earlier. So my view, based on that argument, that this connection is deeper than we imagine, much deeper, is that the hostility, and here I'm very much with Michael, I suspect with Stephen too, there's a real hostility to the entire complex, from colleges right up to Harvard's most arcane research units. And that is got to do with a revulsion, I'll use that word, towards the basic logics through which new knowledge is generated in universities. Karl Popper said it best: conjectures, refutations. You've got to be able to argue so as to produce new things. And when you're completely closed and you think you know everything, the place that's most dangerous for you is the university, big, small, and medium. So that's my actual view of the problem.
Okay, and Steve Trachtenberg, thoughts on what your fellow panelists have had to say?
I think we need to also distinguish between the wide range and difference of the universities and colleges we have in the United States.
Yeah.
There are 4,400 institutions in the United States that grant BA degrees, maybe more, and they are distinguishable. Williams College is not Caltech, and it has different purposes and it has a different role, and yet they are all being looked at as if they were unitary, and that's a terrible mistake. Research universities are dependent on the federal government. Teaching institutions, less so. It might be useful if some of the conversation between the federal government and higher education started to distinguish between different institutions, different roles, different missions, and different degrees of funding. When I was working in the federal government, one of the things we did was to have financial aid instead of coming to the universities, going to the students, who then took their financial aid and went to different institutions, bringing it with them. It became the student's choice where those federal dollars were spent. And the student got to pick that they want to go to a liberal arts college, or they want to go to St. John's, and they want to go to Columbia as an undergraduate. I mean, the range of choices in the United States is absolutely overwhelming. And you wouldn't think that any of this was true if you looked at the way the government is relating to higher education presently.
I went into did the very superficial research on what I read about many years ago, which was, in my experience, the worst I'd ever read of a government and in this case science, which was the story of Trofim Lysenko, the Soviet geneticist who, against most scientific evidence from the late 19th century on, held by Lamarck's view that acquired traits can be transmitted genetically, and was a shrewd enough and vicious enough politician in the world of Joseph Stalin to become in charge of genetics in the Soviet Union, and ultimately responsible for famines in both the Soviet Union and China. His ideas went unchecked. That to me is like total political control. And reading a bit about him, a lot of the politics was very petty. It was doing away with this rival and that rival, and advancing in the process this, to put it mildly, an unusual or a minority view of his science. Are we in any danger of that kind of insanity? I just wonder. I mean, we do have arguments about vaccines that seem they seem primitive to my ear. But are we a stable enough country? Has the university generally, and the various kinds, as Steve points out, kinds of universities, have they established significant connection with the American people that we would see scientists prevail over political interference in
Well,
that?
I was just thinking as you were asking that question, that Senator Kennedy, that Senator, Secretary Kennedy, seems to have repudiated germ theory. I mean, he's taking his grandchildren swimming in some in Rock Creek.
In Rock Creek, yes, in Washington, D.C.,
where there's fecal matter in the water, and what I can't imagine is that his children allow him to take the grandchildren in swimming with him. Yeah. What he wants to do with himself is one thing, but there's something bizarre in that.
It's scary.
I think the greater danger is that in American universities is that someone will say, well, as long as my research isn't compromised, I will swear an oath of loyalty. I will accommodate. What do I care about the anthropology department? I'm in English. Or what do I care about it? And so and this is what they're trying to do. You get the guys in molecular biology who don't really care about how we teach Middle Eastern history, or maybe even object to it themselves, to say, okay, well, let's make a deal. Let's make a deal. This is, I think in 90% of the professors in Italy swore an oath to Mussolini. The Jews in German universities weren't given an opportunity. So that was good for the United States. The guys who can leave will go to the University of Toronto, like the famous anti-fascists from Yale, and or they'll get research jobs in Berlin or in Paris or in Beijing. And the other ones will have to, either they'll make a deal or they'll be in the resistance. But this is an attack on the autonomy of the pursuit of knowledge. And they're attacking the sciences because that's where the money is. but it's really an attack on the culture of the university. And I do fear that many people they'll accommodate themselves with, they say, I'm not a racist, but I can swear allegiance to people who are racist because I want to do my X, whatever X is. And I think we in the university have to stand for the freedom of expression and the freedom of for inquiry that will, without which the university is just meaningless.
Arjun,
Yeah,
thoughts on
I
this?
want to actually, that's a very helpful exchange. And I think the thing that we don't want to lose sight of is that Trump and his regime, I'll just say Trump for short, the wholesale attack on universities, large, small, Eastern, Western, public, private, it's a pretty inclusive agenda he has for a man who's against inclusion. But the it's part of, I think we have to remember, a more general attack on what we can only call either liberalism or liberals in the US. So it's root and branch. It's the Constitution, it's the law, it's elections. So the university is part of something. And here I think Michael is right that it is about knowledge, it's about free inquiry, it's about debate. But all those things are the place where the university connects into the bigger bloodstream. And honestly, I think Trump, if I could use a strong word, hates it, hates that bigger thing because he's made of different stuff. Just let's leave it like that. But the thing I would add, going back to your comment about Stalin, I don't take those things lightly at all. I'm one of some small number of people who has observed that Elon Musk's depredations with his young student acolytes is a lot like Mao in the Cultural Revolution, except that Mao was doing it under the banner of Marxism. Here we're doing it under the banner of, let's call it capitalism, but it is a wholesale cultural revolution. It's an attack on age, generations, expertise, the works. That is what Mao did. And that led to the great leap backward. So that's one thing that I do think we should look at these dictators. The last thing I'll say, which worries me awfully, is a sense that I've had for a long time that whether in India, where I went to college and I was very lucky to get a very good education, or in the US, where I was even luckier, it takes decades, sometimes centuries, to build really powerful institutions. You can undo them in 3, 5, 7 years. I've seen it. I've seen it myself. So I would say we really need to be thoughtful even about how to wait this out, because undoing is dangerously feasible and building is very slow and very hard.
Well, let me ask all of you this, starting with Steve Trachtenberg. How concerned are you about the reaction to all of this being the sort of I'll quietly cultivate my own garden response that Michael Roth described, and why get involved in a problem that doesn't really affect my department? And how vigorous a response do you think the universities will ultimately make? And how long might the damage of this encounter with the federal government be? How bad might it be?
I think it could be profound. I think once you break these things, they're very hard to put back together again. I think one of the things we'll potentially lose will be is the stream of talent that comes to us from other countries. India might be one, but I can think of people who come from all over the planet who try to come to the United States, who will go to multiple other countries, which will be glad to take them in and benefit from our misfortune. This is, I think, as you quite rightly point out, a significant cultural issue. Now, it's not the first time it's happened, and when these things happen, it takes decades to restore the trust and faith in the United States. And it's not just that people are afraid to come to the universities. They're afraid to come to the country lest they don't have the right paperwork. They get arrested. They see a hostility in the environment that makes them say, why should I risk going to the United States? Australia is a perfectly nice country, and they speak English. I can learn English there as well. and they have good red wine. Uh, so
I think it's better in New Zealand, actually.
well, there's that too, and
Yes.
they also speak English. Uh, we're dealing here with very fragile things. They look big, they look rich, but they are actually much more vulnerable than people anticipated. Now, look again. There's been an anti-intellectualism in America,
Yes.
since the founding. So it's not as if it's innovative. And I have been concerned, and I think Michael too. I think I've read things that he's written about the drift towards vocationalism in American higher education in the last generation, where it became less and less about the whole man, is I think the phrase you used, um, having to do with education for its own sake, and merely for what the degree can earn for you when you go back out on the job market. Everybody has to work, everybody has to eat, and education is imperative in that. But we're suffering from several things now. Fewer and fewer young men are going to colleges, more and more women, and that is going to change the professional class in this country in a way that I think was not anticipated at the beginning of the 21st century. I think we're going to see more and more women physicians, more women lawyers, more women professors, and fewer men, and that will create tensions between the genders as well as the socioeconomic relationships. So dramatic changes are going on, and will be irreversibly changed unless we pay some attention to it.
And Michael Roth, your glimpse of the future as you imagine it?
Well, I think if we need to resist these attempts to control our freedoms, and like everyone has said, it's much harder to get your freedom back after you've lost it. You should defend it while you still have it, and I think that that extends not just to people protecting their own endowment or their own area of the university, but to protect the freedom of inquiry, freedom of expression, the rights of autonomous institutions and individuals within them to learn in an atmosphere conducive to exploration. And that is going to make for allies with people who are concerned about freedom of religion. People are going to be concerned about the freedom of choice in the commercial sphere, because authoritarianism just doesn't stop only at educational institutions. Authoritarians feel the need to control all institutions, and a narcissistic authoritarian even more so, wanting to ensure that everybody bends the knee, whether it's a law firm, a newspaper, or a school. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's only a couple of months in. There's a lot of opportunity for political resistance to this dramatic overreach.
I want to hear from all of you. And the one question that really I asked you about it, Michael, at the beginning, but hasn't come up in any of your remarks, which is anti-Semitism, and how. Well, we can start with Professor Appadurai. I mean, where, if at all, does anti-Semitism and combating it figure in this conflict between Washington and the universities?
Obviously, a very large question, but I do think there are some basics involved here. And one of those basics is you only have to look, without being heavily ideologically motivated, to say that Black people, young Black men and women on campuses, have been experiencing horrendous amounts of racism forever. So I say that not to make a tit for tat, but to say that many groups on US campuses have contexts in which they are belittled, dehumanized, marginalized. And I think it's very urgent to say that the exceptional nature of this attack should be questioned just on principle, saying, look, lots of people have hurt identities, destroyed histories, and so on and so forth. And we need to think about all of them. The other one is what my closest friends from my class at Brandeis tell me. Anti-Semitism is a false flag. I quote one of my very thoughtful, moderate friends, Jewish, needless to say, Brandeis graduate, who just says, I'm not interested in that discussion because it's a false flag for Trump. He's not saying it's not an issue, just like our colleagues. It's an issue. But what is it for this government? It seems like, at best, a Trojan horse and maybe worse.
Steve Trachtenberg?
Yes, well, what's new? I was walking across campus one day at Columbia. This is 1956.
You were an undergraduate at this time.
An undergraduate. And I ran into Rabbi Hoffman, who was then the cleric at the Hillel. It wasn't called Hillel, but that's what it was. And he stopped me and he said, "How was I?" And we chatted. And then he said, "I see where you're running for student government president." And I said, "Yes." And he said, I wish you wouldn't do that. And I said, "Why not?" He said, "I think it calls too much attention to us." Now, this is 1956. And the school was full of kids who had come out of World War II. There were Jewish kids out of Bronx High School of Science at Columbia at the time in significant numbers, and Stuyvesant High School. And here he was wearing, it seemed to me, I thought he was crazy. And paid no attention to him whatsoever. And I ran and I won office in the student government. But I suspect that he wasn't crazy. He just was more nervous than I was. I have encountered in the course of my own career people who took me aside to give me good advice and tell me that I could abandon plans of becoming a university president because I was Jewish. And when I became president, I don't think I was the first, but I was sort of a pioneer. And at this interview for the job, the issue of my faith became a matter that was discussed for about 45 minutes. Really? And there were members of the board on the search committee when I interviewed for the presidency of the University of Hartford, who were very concerned that perhaps Hartford was a city that would not be hospitable to having a Jewish president for its university. It turned out to be absolutely false. And one of the people who worried about that, took me to lunch after a year and said that he had made a bet with himself that I was going to fail as president of the University of Hartford because I would not be accepted in the city. And he said he had been watching me like a hawk for a year, concluded that he was wrong about me and wrong about the city. And he then gave me a gift to the university of $25,000 because he said that was the bet he had made with himself. and he had lost. I invited, and he'd been on the board and quit over my appointment. I asked him to come back on the board, and he said no. He said he concluded that he was so wrong about Hartford that he probably was no longer acurant enough to be able to serve. So these are issues that have been with us since the founding of the country. They will be with us for a while. I think it's important to push back, to protect our students, and get on with life. I don't think we ought to make more out of this than it deserves.
And Michael Roth, the last word, and it'll have to be a brief one because I've not managed time well enough.
Well, I just agree with my friends here that it's a false flag. Anti-Semitism, of course, exists. The old Jewish definition, as you probably know, is hating Jews more than is necessary. Garber, Eisgruber, Roth, the three resistors to Trump. It sounds like a firm of orthodontists. I mean, it's where there should be so much. There should be the level of anti-Semitism you have at Cambridge. We should have in Congress. I mean, we don't. It's not great. It's always can be better, but it's a false flag. It's just an attempt to get control using Jews as a vehicle for that control.
Well, Michael Roth, Stephen Joel Trachtenberg, and Arjun Appadurai, thanks to all three of you for a very interesting hour.
Thank you.
Session. And many thanks to Joshua Plout and Roni Giuliano of American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, the producers of Global Connections, and also to our technical director, Bobby Grandone. American Friends of Rabin Medical Center is a 501c3 national charitable organization which represents, in the United States, Israel's largest hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petach Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv. The website is www.afrmc.org. At this critical time, please consider a donation to AFRMC's Emergency Medical Relief Fund to help Rabin Medical Center in Israel as it treats wartime casualties, including returning hostages. You can donate online at www.afrmc.org. You can watch this and all past shows on AFRMC's YouTube channel and listen to the podcast on Spotify, Global Connections with Robert Siegel. Thank you and stay safe.